This is my second video on the World Rapid Play Championship that took place in Doha in Qatar. And after the second day, after 9 rounds, there were 2 leaders, Vladislav Artemiev and Hans Niemann. And then 4 players on 7. And I'd like to look at the round 10 game. So the first game on the final day between Magnus Carlsen and Alexei Sarana. So Carlsen with a lot of work to do in this final day. Let's take a look at this game. E4 from Carlsen. Sarana went for a Sicilian. Now Carlsen generally doesn't like to go for the open Sicilian in these rapid play games, that he can lose control very quickly. He prefers a more stable pawn structure. So he plays bishop c4, and this is something that he's played quite a lot in rapid and blitz games. And castles, and now e6 is a common move. g6 is also a common move, both decent. And c3. Now a4, that's to give the bishop a retreat on a2. Now previously Carlsen has tried h3 here, but after d5, black is very comfortable. Black has the slight space advantage and there's potential to attack that pawn later on. So Carlsen went for bishop e3. So that prevents d5. Obviously if that's played, then the c pawn can be taken. Therefore b6 protects the c pawn, so black is ready to play d5 now. Bishop is slightly oddly placed on e3. Normally in king's pawn openings, that bishop often stays for a long time on c1 because it's not quite clear where that bishop belongs. And here you can see that, you know, black can potentially hit the bishop with knight g4. So h3 was played, but you know, it's time consuming. And I mean, I think for a rapid play game, this is good enough, but this is nothing special for white. Bishop b7, so Sarana is developing well, and he gets in d5 anyway. So if this is taken, again, I think black is really comfortable, I mean, particularly as you gain a tempo hitting that bishop. So Carlsen at least maintains his center, so he puts the bishop on b5. And queen c7. Again, I think black is very comfortable here. Rook e1. And now I think Sarana would do best to exchange on e4 and play something like knight h5. I mean, this is a very known structure, well-known structure actually. On this side of the board, this is quite a nice structure against these pawns. You know, white has some control over these squares, and maybe later on you press with a5. But on the other side of the board, black has control over these squares. And yeah, it's a roughly balanced position. But Sarana kept the tension with rook d8. Now that's what we're often told to do, maintain the tension in the middle. But he's left it too long. And Carlsen seized his moment. He exchanged on c6 and played e5 and went d4. So you can see that it's now a French kind of structure. If black plays the pawn to e6, it's a kind of French, but you can see that bishop is a bit shut out, and this bishop as well. And it's not an easy position for black, because you have to decide, where are you breaking? Are you playing on the queen side? I mean, you could play something like a5, and then maybe later on push with b5, c4 and b5. Or do you try to crack things open for that bishop and play f6? I mean, this bishop is very poor on g7. So if Carlsen can maintain his pawn center, he's doing pretty well. So yeah, I think black's moves here are maybe f6 or a5. But f6, you know, might weaken the king side. These are tricky decisions for black. Whenever you change the pawn structure, that's obviously consequential, and you have to be very careful about doing that. And I think you need more time to judge the consequences. And in rapid play, remember, it's 15 minutes plus 10 seconds every time you make a move. In rapid play, that's really hard to judge. But I think Sarana makes another inaccuracy here. He takes on d4. And this is good for white. So obviously there's a threat to take here. Rook e8, and now knight f3 secures the pawn on e5. So this bishop is still rotten, and you don't really want to play f6. I mean, this knight is beautifully placed after an exchange. You know, something like this is just not a very nice pawn structure for black. Beautiful knight here, and neither bishop is very good. So Sarana played knight c5. Now he's heading for e4. He must have thought, well, this would give him reasonable counterplay. Queen c1 is an excellent move from Carlsen, so he wants to play bishop h6. I know this is a rotten bishop, but once the exchange takes place, then black's king is not very well placed. So Sarana exchanged. Now if these bishops can get out, then black should be doing okay, but you know, with this central grip, Carlsen's doing very well here. And you can see he's advanced the a-pawn, starting to create pressure on the queen side. Sarana exchanged and played a6. But now both these pawns are a bit poor. Black could at some point play e6 and then maybe go for f6, but Carlsen shuts out that possibility with e6. Excellent move. And some position like, you know, f6, then, well, the queen has a choice, but probably back here. And this is a very uncomfortable position, as we're going to see. Queen c7 played, hitting the rook. Rook a3. And Sarana does go for this. I mean, he doesn't really want to allow a piece on e6, so f6. And the queen comes back. But this is still a massive problem for black, because that bishop is so poor. Neither bishop is well placed. And if f5, then you can see that both these squares are available for white's knights. I mean, it's potentially really horrible. You know, with the knight coming in, maybe here, maybe d7. Rook b8. So Sarana perhaps looking to get counterplay on the queen side. Bit more pressure here. Bishop c8. So opening up the b file, but b4. Now this would be a problem if this pawn on c3 could be attacked, but it's well defended. I mean, it's absolutely no problem at all. And pawn on b4 clamps the pawn on a6, but also you can imagine if a knight comes round to c5, then this is really fantastic. And maybe, yeah, I can imagine this knight comes to c5, the next knight comes to d4. It's crushing position. Rook a5, bit of pressure on the d pawn. Okay, rook e1 protects the pawn on e6. And black is so cramped, it's horrible. And now the knight swings round. So this one wants to come to c5, the next one will come to d4, and once the knights are there, well, black is just dead. The a-pawn is going to drop, it's horrendous. f5, trying to get this bishop into the game, but queen d3. And rook c7. Bit of pressure, but rook takes d5. Queen b6 and knight c5. And black is absolutely crushed in this position. Absolutely crushed. a5, knight d7. Of course, if that's exchanged, then life is not too good for black with that pawn on d7. Rook c3 and knight takes queen. Well, okay. After rook takes, then white is a whole rook up. So actually after this, Sarana resigned. I mean, that was positional domination from Carlsen. And it really stems back to this decision here by Sarana to allow this transition with e5. And this is just uncomfortable for black. And yes, he should have taken here and played knight h5. And then it's just balanced. So at this point, so this was the first game of the final day, and Carlsen was just on a winning streak. And, well, he still had a tricky game in, so he'd won, let me see, 3 in a row up to this point. But he had a tricky game in round 11. He faced Hans Niemann. So they have history, of course. But it was a very tight gioco piano, and I'm going to join the game after 32 moves. So Carlsen had won a pawn, but you can see that that extra pawn is on b3. And with major pieces, then that's not always easy to convert this extra pawn. So let's see what Carlsen did here. So his pieces are in pretty good positions. His rook's very active, tying black to the f7 pawn. Certainly can't advance the b pawn for the moment. You just have to take things step by step. So king g2, good move from Carlsen. Securing the king, so there's no checks on the back rank, and everything is beautifully protected. Rook b4. Rook d8 from Carlsen. So now this is uncomfortable for black. You can see that with white attacking on the 8th rank, black has to be very careful. Now, you could bring the rook back, but in exchange, and then rook d7, maintaining the pressure, queen e6, and then rook b7, for example. So this kind of endgame, this queen endgame, with the king beautifully protected on g2, the queen covering the diagonal. So black has no counterplay, and the pawn could just advance very easily down the board, and should be a straightforward win for white. So Niemann decided to go for a rook and pawn endgame. Now sometimes, you know, one extra pawn is not enough in a rook endgame. Let's see how Carlsen dealt with this. So king f3, the rook came back, and now we've got a pure rook endgame, and the rook came back to d3. Very common type of endgame. It's important this rook is active. Protects the b pawn, but also on d3 it prevents the king marching over. And now white's task is to bring the king over, attack the rook, and advance the b pawn. So black needs counterplay, and that's why f5 was played. The rook retreats. That means that after this it has checking distance, so the king can't go in front of the pawn, it'll just be checked back. So the king came back to b2 and rook b8, preventing the pawn advancing. Okay, so how does white make progress here? So this is textbook stuff. I mean, this is the model endgame. I mentioned before that this rook is actually in an excellent position. So it prevents black's king from coming across. And now it just makes one little step up the board to enable pawn to b4. Now black is looking for counterplay on the king side. And that's why g5 was played. And now the king is able to advance. and h5. So looking to maybe fix a pawn on the king side. Okay, so again, a very important moment in the game. I think we need a think and drink moment. So I'm going to have a drink of my tea. I'd like you to have a think. How are you going to make progress in this position with white? White to play. Cheers. Do you want to improve your chess? Get exclusive access to live masterclasses with yours truly? Get hot opening ideas? Then subscribe to patreon.com/PowerPlayChess, and for just $25 a month you get a newsletter with a detailed test game to gauge your standard of play, a monthly video with puzzles to test your calculating skills, a monthly opening survey where I give my take on a hot variation, access to an archive of over 100 opening surveys, access to video playlists so you can research your favourite openings using the PowerPlayChess archives. And as a patron, you are able to join in the exclusive live masterclasses where you can ask me questions directly. All this for only $25 a month. That's exceptional value. So do subscribe to patreon.com/PowerPlayChess. Enjoy the benefits and improve your chess. It's still too early to bring the king up the board. I'd like to play king c4 and b5, but then rook c8 check and rook c2, and you can see that black has counterplay. And it's important that these pawns were advanced, because then you're ready to push if you get a passed pawn. So what do you play here? Now Carlsen's move was excellent. He played h4. Now black has a problem. If pawn takes, then rook takes, and you can see the rook is secure and the pawns are split. And well, the rook can just sit here protecting, and then the king can advance with the pawn. I mean, black doesn't have a good move here, basically. Niemann played g4. And now Carlsen advanced. So what's the difference? Well, if black goes for counterplay now with rook c8, if rook c2, then Carlsen has created a square on f4 for the rook. The rook protects the pawn on f2. It protects the pawn on b4. It hits the pawn on f5. So the king can't move across because of rook takes pawn. And then the king can move out of the way and just shepherd the pawn down the board. And that's roughly what happens in the game. So after king c4, I should mention after king b5, rook b8 check, then, well, king c6 and b5 if rook check, again, king b7, and the pawn can just come down the board. And you can see that after this, again, rook f4 and rook b2, the rook protects the pawn, the king just comes back, and then b5. So it is very important that that rook is able to protect both pawns. So in the game, king e5, rook f4, again, absolutely secure. Pawn is ready to advance. Niemann checks. King b5. Again, the checks have no effect because the rook protects the pawn. Rook c3. King b6. So the king and pawn just shuffle down the board, and there is absolutely nothing that black can do here. There you go, the king just edging down the board with the pawn. Now, how do you finish this one off? Well, If you know the Lucena position, then this will be a very easy task. And in this position, Niemann resigned, because if rook c2 check, then there we go. It's basically the same concept as the Lucena position. The rook just blocks and the pawn advances. Or if, let's say, rook b1, then you just shift this rook round to here. Rook a4, rook a5, rook b5, there's nothing that black can do, or indeed rook c4 will do the same thing. Rook here and rook b5, or indeed king c7 and b8. Perfect technique from Carlsen after Niemann went in for the rook and pawn endgame. So the key moments really are the fact that this rook is beautifully placed, allowing the king to transfer to the queen side, and then at this moment rook d4, edging up the board, and then this excellent move h4. So Carlsen made it look very simple, but it's only if you find moves like this that it really is simple. So that game, defeating Hans Niemann, was crucial, and Artemiev was also up there, but faltered. And yeah, in the next game, Carlsen outplayed Adomush, 14-year-old. I mean, he had a fantastic tournament actually. And then in the final round, Carlsen had a solid draw with Giri, and that meant that Carlsen finished a point clear of the field. Absolutely fantastic achievement. That was his 6th World Rapid Play title. I mean, no one has come anywhere clear. Anand has won 2, but this is, I repeat, a 6th World Rapid Play title from Carlsen. It's an extraordinary record. No one has come close to that. And that also gave him the first prize of 70,000 euros. Absolutely superb performance. So, well, we'll have to see what happens in the World Blitz Championship, which follows immediately after. I'll report back. It's certainly by the end of it, but I'll hope to be a little bit more punctual with my report. Anyway, an outstanding achievement once again by Magnus Carlsen.